Hi, everyone. This is the introductory lecture to Week 6, Common School Reform, and everything for this unit is due Thursday, March 2nd at 11:59 p.m. But first, I want to talk a bit about the Week 5 discussion forum, which was terrific. Discussion question number 1 was about whether or not it is ethically valid to have a strong purpose of education. And there's a really terrific conversation going on there. It's not finished yet, but the part I picked up is fascinating. I really like this question because, as many of you noted, it does cause us to pause and think about what we are doing. And this reminds me of an early article that I read by Lisa Delpit, and many of you might have read this article, that explores how progressive educational practices, asking questions, allowing freedom and children's voice in the classroom, are seen by some ethnic and racial and cultural groups as confusing and oppressive. So when I first read that piece, I thought, wow, here I am, asking everybody their opinions and being really flexible and thinking that a really good classroom is one in which everybody participates democratically. And then I realized that what I think is democratic can appear to some as awful and as confusing, as oppressive, marginalizing, and exclusionary. So what I think is a free and democratic practice may be oppressive to others. So that reminds me of the American colonists, because what they thought was right, good, true, and ethical, and the only way to go, seems to us today as being very oppressive. So a large part of this question and this conundrum has to do with different historical contexts, of course. But as many of you noted, not all of it has to do with historical context. A lot of it has to do with ethic and democracy and what we think of as citizenship and community, and building unity. How do you build a nation or a community or a club or a classroom or a friendship group without creating and teaching norms of behavior and common values? And if a definition of community is that some people are outside of that community, are we intentionally excluding some people by not teaching them those values and norms? Now, granted, the stakes were a little different in the past than, for example, the outright exclusion and oppression of whole groups of people. But the principles of education and learning is similar. We use education in part to create community, and that's good, and sometimes that's not good. I also enjoyed question 2, which was about your responses to the primary documents. We can see a lot by looking at the language of a single text. My favorite one, as I noted in my comments, was the Old Deluder Satan Act. I really love that because certainly it's a document that is promoting education as a tool of assimilation of cultural norms. But one of the things I also like about the text is that for the sheer fact that it refers to community funding of education. In other words, the responsibility of citizens to pay school taxes to public education. That is language that in our anti-tax society we very rarely hear. On the other hand, the text forbidding the education of Negroes in Mississippi lays out the very, very, very opposite side of the local control issue of education. In that case, citizens are told that in order to improve society, they are prohibited from educating a specific and large number of people. So community enforcement of education through government and other community organizations can go both ways in terms of ethical practices, both then and both now. So for week 6, Common School Reform, I have only one really terrific discussion question. I think you'll like it. It's a lot of fun. And let me tell you a bit about week 6. This week is about Common School Reform, and it gets us into the major events and issues of the history of American education during what is called the 19th century Common School movement. And that term, Common School, refers to what we now think of as the public schools, publicly funded and managed community schools. So this is essentially the story of the beginning of our public school system. And Horace Mann is the big mover and shaker here. And like a lot of these early reformers, he does some really great things. He advocates for publicly funded schooling and some lousy things. He restricts that public schooling by race and gender and religion and to some extent class. So you'll read 2 things about Horace Mann. There is, by the way, an oversized statue of Horace Mann in the middle of the James Bryant Park in Yellow Springs, Ohio. After Mann left his position as Commissioner of Education in Massachusetts, he came west to be the first and founding president of Antioch College in Yellow Springs. And so as you are hiking through that park, it's about an hour. Yellow Springs and the park is about an hour from here, and there's a great state park there, the John Bryant State Park. If you're lucky, you'll come out of the woods. There's a lot of woods and up and down hiking. Then you come out of the woods into the clearing, and at the end of the clearing, you see this big oversized statue, and what it is a statue of Horace Mann dressed in Roman robes. It's pretty wild. You feel like you might be on something when you see it, but there he is. And sometimes the Antioch students paint his shoes red, which is fun too. So anyway, you're going to read a little bit about Horace Mann. You'll also read a chapter from a terrific book called Self-Taught, African American Education in Slavery and Freedom by Heather Williams, that explores how millions of enslaved and free African Americans who Horace Mann and the other common school reformers ignored, how they developed their own education. Then you're going to read Kim Tolley's really excellent essay about gender and science curriculum. This is a really good example of the history of curriculum. And what I love about this essay is that Tolley raises all sorts of questions about the articulated purpose of curriculum and how that changes over time. In this case, science, which has for most of our lifetimes been identified as a curriculum for boys, was different in the past. And why? She explores that. Then you're going to respond to the one really fun discussion question. One thing that I think I've forgotten to remind you is the historical review essay assignment. This is a final assignment. It's due at the end of the semester, but I ask you to choose your topic or the article that you will review by March 2nd, by next week. So if you have a spare second, take a look at that assignment and think about which article you will review. In the assignment discussion, I provide directions about how you will search for an article in the History of Education Quarterly. Master's students will review one article, doctoral students will review 2 articles, and doctoral students, get in touch with me if you have some other article that you'd like to look at. So enjoy Common School Reform. See you later.